Hey, Gordy or Michael, just a volume check-in. Can you hear me? Just a nod is good.
Yep, can hear you.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Jensen.
I'm here.
Need to warn you that at 2:40, I will take a call from my doctor.
That's good. We'll
Okay.
we'll all listen in.
Okay. I will probably shut off the sound and disappear from the picture for
No worries.
probably 10, 15 minutes. Then I'll be back.
And apparently Doug is wrapping up a doctor's appointment. He's gonna be a little tardy.
Okay.
Nice tie, Dean.
Well, thought I would dress with the little people there, Stuart. Oh, you got a tie on, you bugger.
Yeah, I've got one too.
Do as I'm told there, sir.
Leader has to set an example, right?
Apparently not. Everything okay, Michael? Anything we should worry about?
No, just a renewal of a prescription, but I did something silly and actually ran out. But I couldn't postpone that phone call.
No. Have we heard from Cynthia?
Nothing yet. Doug's gonna be late. That's all I got.
Should we have somebody call Cynthia? Nobody's
Yes, we're going to do that.
okay.
All right, everybody, it's 2:00. And I think we'll kick it off from there. So I'd like to call to order the Transportation Committee meeting at 2 p.m. I would like to start with acknowledging the fact that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of our Coast Salish peoples. We'll start right away with roll call. Councillor Baxter.
Hello.
Thank you. Councillor Day. Don't know. I'm definitely here. Apparently, Councillor Kobayashi is going to be a little late. He's just leaving a doctor's appointment. Councillor Parkinson.
I'm here.
And Mr. Mayor Martin.
Present.
Thank you.
And I guess
What about me? What
Now-
about Gordy? Is he chopped liver?
Come on. Okay. There's no Logan on my list and I already forgot you.
yeah, I think that
Councillor Logan, give us a sound check.
Present.
And I see Councillor Day, just give us a sound check, please.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Doug's gonna be a little late, but he'll sign in as soon as he can. All right. Way to the Reese's, 2.1, approval of the agenda.
So moved.
And I would ask that we start using our virtual hands, please, so I don't have to watch the screen and my notes at all at the same time, see who's waving. So if we use our virtual hands, it'll pop up and I'll know that you've raised your hand. Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Is there a seconder? We don't need a seconder for that, do we? All in favor of approving the minutes? Or anyone opposed? How about that? See nothing? That's approved. Adoption of the minutes. Transportation Committee meeting of June the 1st. May I have a mover, please? Oh, we have a hand. Hang on, let's have a look. Councillor Logan, thank you very much. And anyone opposed to the June 1st minutes? Are all those opposed? If you can raise your hand, please. Seeing nothing, thank you very much. Public participation, I'm not aware of any public participation. Can you confirm for me, Amanda?
We have nobody wishing to speak.
Okay, thank you so much. New business 5.1. Charting the future of the Suk Road corridor, a facilitated discussion. Mr. Borhill, are you available?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. Over to you. Do you have a screen to share there? Sorry.
We will soon. I first off wanted to introduce our guest today, Dan Casey. So the committee is familiar with Dan's previous work, helping us update the Transportation Master Plan. The city's engaged Dan and Urban Systems to help the committee through a facilitated discussion about the future of Suk Road. Today, we've got the opportunity to look at how we're going to provide feedback to BC Transit, specifically with respect to the integration of bus lanes on the city towards Victoria side of the road, so east/northbound, along Suk Road between Metchosin Road and Jerome Roads. So really, this is an opportunity for us to discuss the modal prioritization and hierarchy of different types of transportation modes in the OTP, and if committee is interested in affirming that, provide that feedback to transit. That would be helpful for them in determining how to proceed with the design phase, which they hope to complete in the fall. So we've got James Wadsworth here from Transit. He's only available, he's a transportation project planner and our contact with respect to BC Transit's bus lane project on Suk Road. He's available just for the first 15 or 20 minutes of the meeting, unfortunately. So if the committee's got any questions specifically for James in terms of the context of this discussion, now would be the time to ask him. And with that, I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chair, if there's any questions for Mr. Wadsworth, and then proceeding that over to Mr. Casey.
And thank you, Ian, and welcome, Mr. Wadsworth. We do have a list of hands here, and we are away to the races with Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen. Mr. Wadsworth, I just, obviously this is pretty exciting stuff we're talking about here, but it seems to me talking about eastbound traffic going into Victoria without looking at westbound traffic coming out is, I'm not sure I understand why, at least at this stage of the project, we wouldn't be looking, whatever we did going into town, we'd look at mirroring coming out of town. Am I missing something here, or what's the thinking besides just talking about eastbound traffic?
Oh, that's a good point. Can everyone hear me? Just a test there. Yeah.
You sound great, James.
Okay. We looked at both directions, and we looked at where transit was caught in queues, and we looked at travel time savings, and it didn't appear there was enough benefit at this time to warrant a bus lane coming out of town from Colwood Corners towards Royal Roads up to Metchosin at this time. So we're bringing forth a near-term concept that we think would have an immediate benefit.
I guess, sorry if I may just carry on, Councillor Jansen. I get that. That's obviously sensible and practical. No sense spending what's probably an awful lot of money for something if there's not a lot of benefit to it. But it seems to me, at least at this point, we don't want to box ourselves into any corner. So we should be looking at, if we're got rapid bus going into town, at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, we'd expect rapid bus coming out of town. And we want to make sure we're juggling our right of way, which I understand is pretty constrained to allow for both. Even though, once we know what we may do in the future coming westbound, we may just shelve that as long as we know it's going to be feasible. Again, can you comment?
What I could suggest is, last time when we looked at further down the corridor between Goldstream and the Island Highway, there was more appetite for extended bus lanes during that section. And so what we did when we came back to do our second round of design work, one of the conditions that council had was to ask us to look at the cost of bus lanes for the full corridor, just to get an understanding of what that right of way is that we need and what it costs. So if that's something that council would like us to pursue, it could be asked when we bring the project back to you to for some form of endorsement, so we could proceed to the next design level. So that's an option we could look at.
So again, costs are going to be significant, but more important to me is that we just make sure that we look at hard enough at the traffic coming out of town, that whatever we do for traffic going into town, we don't box ourselves into sort of some unsolvable or really tough issues for if and when it's time to do the westbound lanes. That's all I'm asking. It would seem to me that just looking at the ultimate thing before you go back down to the eastbound would make some sense.
What I'll do is I can follow up with staff on that, and we could look at what it would cost to do to look at the bus lanes for the full corridor, and what kind of property we would need to do that, just so we have an understanding of what the next phases of the project are.
Thank you very much. And that's it for me there, Councillor.
Right, I'm up. I forgot. Sorry. Thank you, Stuart. That was concise. I appreciate that. Councillor Day, you're up.
Thank you. Fairly short question for me. Just when I was reviewing the slide package, Jerome Road really didn't figure into that, and then it came up in the staff report. So I'm just not understanding why we're talking about to Jerome Road when I think our consideration is all the way to Goldstream.
There I am. I got off mute. What's happening with the Colwood Corners development right now is the frontage along the new development there will include a bus into town as part of that. And so we expect that to be delivered as the frontage is completed for that development. We've been working closely with them recently with design work that McElhaney has been doing for us on that section of the corridor.
I'm sorry, I think it was an internet thing. You cut out a little bit there just as you were speaking. So there is a bus lane included in the improvements that are being done for Colwood Corners?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Let's have a look here. Next is Councillor Baxter.
Mr. Wadsworth, I've got two questions. First one is simply a follow-on from Councillor Day's. I believe you said that included in the improvements on the frontage of the Oni development, there is a bus lane going into town, but I believe when the original road design was done, it allowed for bus lanes in both directions. Can you comment on that?
My comments were at this moment, I'm not aware of the amount of right-of-way available to do that in that section right now. I know we were having a tough time just fitting that bus lane in front of the frontage. We had to do a narrower bus lane and have a shared bike lane to do it. But again, if we're doing more technical studies and we're wanting to look at the possibility of doing that, we could include that in a technical report at a later date.
Okay, thank you. And in the presentation that we're about to see, there are 3 options given. Does BC Transit have a favorite option at this moment? Are those your 3 options, or are you still very much at the we need to investigate before we can choose stage?
I think the favorite option that the transit agency has is the shared bus only lane into town. We haven't completed a multiple evaluation criteria yet to fully look at it, but the idea of a counter flow lane in that location seemed to be say maybe doesn't fit with the rest of what's going on in the corridor. And the other thing that we looked at was the HOV lane concept. But to fit that one in, it caused a significant amount of queuing for general purpose traffic, which probably wouldn't be that highly supported by people who are making regional commutes.
But in order to calculate that queuing, you have to make an assumption about how many people would switch to giving their buddy a lift into town in order to be able to use that lane. And I don't really see how you can make that calculation.
Right. We did do some modeling as part of this, Councillor Baxter, and I think that our consultant had a number, which I don't have at this point right now, but it will be included in the final report that we provide to council to show what the results were for the modeling for each mode on the corridor.
Okay, yeah, I'd be really interested in where that number comes from, okay, and whether it's, you know, whether it's applicable to a place like Colwood or not.
Yeah,
so thank you very much.
So, yeah, we did a VISM model.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome, Councillor Kobayashi. We're just at item 5.1, and we're hearing from the transit planners currently, just so you can get caught up there. Next is Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hey, James, thank you very much. I just had a question regarding the shared transit and cycling lanes. It worries me a bit. Just there's been some stories recently or within the last year when Victoria did theirs, and about the conflict and some frustration with cyclists and transit operators. Has that been studied at all, or do you have any further comment as to whether that has turned out to be a big issue other than what has been reported?
I think my comment on that was the number of cyclists going down the corridor was low enough that it was manageable for the transit buses to give the cyclists enough space that it was safe. There's been incidences to date, and it's been in service now for a couple of years. And I don't know if Dan might have more information on it when he gets to his section, but there, you know, it might not be a shared bus bike lane the whole corridor. It might just be in a pinch point.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just for myself, just a couple of questions here. There is talk about HOV lane. Was there consideration or thought given to bus/HOV lane, or does that make it then more challenging to have co-located with bicycles?
Yeah, this was going to be a bus HOV lane, so bus and cars with 2 or more passengers in the and I think under that scenario, I have to recall here because I haven't looked closely at it. To do that, there was a separate bike lane in scenario, but to make that work, one of the general purpose traffic lanes had to be taken away to fit.
Gotcha. And there is a series of residences along there. I mean, all the engineering in the world isn't going to help if people are all pulling out of their driveways at 7 a.m. I mean, what's the feeling on that from a planning perspective?
From a planning perspective, the best place to put a bus lane is in the center of the road to reduce friction. But that can be really hard to achieve. We looked at it on Douglas Street, and you had to restrict so many turning movements on the corridor. It's not good for business access. And when we took it out to the public, it wasn't supported at all. So we went to the curbside lanes, which, you know, do have some trade-offs, but they're manageable.
Okay, gotcha. And I see another hand here. Michael. That's strike one there, Michael.
Sorry, I said I am allowed to do the SIC committee. So yeah, Mr. Wadsworth, I don't know if you know what we're being asked to approve here in the way of a message to BC Transit, but it's basically just a priority of the different modal means of travel. And I just want to sort of ask you how you will interpret that. Obviously, in the priority order, since we have put single occupancy vehicles at the bottom, that doesn't mean to say that we're encouraging the idea of taking away single occupancy vehicle lanes altogether. So how will you interpret that modal priority if that's the message we send to you?
Well, I think we'll be working with staff to determine what's best with your direction. But I think that what it meant is when we looked at the guidelines for what the desired was for widths of car lane or auto lanes, widths of bike lanes and sidewalks, maybe it's instead of having 3.5 meter travel lanes for automobiles, maybe it's 3 meters. That's what they have on Douglas. And maybe if we were able to fit a bike lane in and we didn't have the room to do 1.8 meters, maybe it's getting down to 1.5. And then also making sure there's enough room on that sidewalk along there that you know, it's still desirable for people to walk down and taking in the utility poles. They're a bit of a couple places.
Right, yeah, I agree that although 3 meter bus lanes are not normal, I believe they have them on Shelburne in Victoria, and they've been there for quite some time, and they haven't been a problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ian, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now would be the time for us to hear from Mr. Casey and view his presentation. So pass it over to him.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Maybe if you could all confirm on your end, you're seeing it.
Looks good.
Okay. Okay, so is there a big red slide that says Sooke Road Corridor?
Sure is.
Excellent. And can you see your smiling faces in the top right, or is it just the slide deck?
Just the slides.
Perfect. Well, perfect. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you having me here today to talk to the Sooke Road Corridor. That prior discussion was great. Really happy to have James in the room virtually, as well as Ian as well. There is a lot of collaboration involved in something like this, so it is good that various parties are around the table. I'm going to give a 15 or 20 minute overview on the Sooke Road Corridor, on some of the multimodal interests in terms of desire for space for different travel modes on the corridor. So that includes not only the current transit priority initiative and trying to carve out space for transit priority, but also looking multimodally at vehicle traffic, pedestrians, cyclists, and other road users. And as the summary slide indicates, and your staff report indicates, our goal is to reaffirm that the modal hierarchy that is in the OCP still applies, and it's council's direction that will apply on Suk Road. And so we'll conclude here with a little discussion on whether that still applies and which direction you would prefer to take this. Better recap, Suk Road corridor, the portion that we're dealing with is between Goldstream Ave and Veterans Memorial. It is almost 3 kilometers long. Key intersections include Veterans Memorial, Machosen Road, Kelly Road, Aldine / Royal Roads, as well as Goldstream. Some key stats. This portion of road accommodates up to 28,000 vehicles per day. Along its length. There are 8 bus routes that currently use the corridor, at least a portion of the corridor.
Dan, your audio is in and out.
Oh, it is.
You're using earphones or not, but
okay. I will talk a little more slowly and see if that helps. I'm not on earphones right now.
so that sounds good there. So I don't know,
Okay.
maybe you're moving around or something.
Okay. In terms of community and land use, obviously Colwood Town Center along the corridor, Royal Roads University, as well as the Hadley Park Commercial Center. And then in terms of key dimensions, the right of way, so the public property that this road sits within, it varies along its length, but it's typically in the range of about 22 meters to 24 meters. And so that is the space that essentially we have that we can plan within. Now, property can be acquired over time, but that is dependent obviously on redevelopment and subdivision. And so in terms of the property that we can work within currently, it's generally in 20 to 24 meters. And so as we'll see as we get into this, and you've already seen, there's we can't fit it all at the desired dimensions that all travel modes would prefer. And so this is really the crux of the exercise. It's an exercise in trade-offs. Typical condition, this is a photo looking east or north toward Royal Roads. Typical 4 travel lanes, 2 in each direction. Center left turn lanes, so that's either left turn lanes at key intersections or 2-way center left turn lanes that facilitate access to private properties or more minor roads. Other center medians in places. And then there's actually a portion of the corridor that doesn't have the center component as well. Sidewalks, so there are sidewalks in some form, both sides along the entire corridor. They vary from, on the right, you can see off in the far distance is formal concrete sidewalk up above curb and gutter. On the left hand side, it's more of an asphalt walkway with asphalt extruded curb. And then also worth noting, in a couple key locations, bike lanes have been installed, and those are definitely not continuous along the corridor, but they've been concurrent with redevelopment along the corridor over time. So you start to see a little bit of it. If this photo were swiveled, you'd see a buffered bike lane through there, and you see new lanes as you approach Colwood Corners and Royal Roads as well. So what does the official community plan say about modal priorities? There's one key policy that we want to point to here, and it's on the screen on the bottom right. Nice OCP, by the way. It's very well done, and it has very nice, from a transportation perspective, very nice directions that are very firm, such as this, that are in there, which is very helpful when you're planning based off your OCP. Not always the case. So this policy 8.2.1.2 deals with mode hierarchy, and that's basically how we prioritize the various modes when we're making decisions about transportation investments. And so modal hierarchy in descending order begins with walking at 1, transit, 2, cycling, goods movement, autonomous and high occupancy vehicles, and lastly, single occupant vehicles. And so this was touched on earlier. It is very high level, but it's meant to give direction to where emphasis and where priority is put in terms of considering the various travel modes. A couple other key policies to highlight specific to sidewalk design. OCP talks about a minimum clear walking width of 2 meters on sidewalks, 2 meters, 6 feet. And the idea being with that is it's clear. It's meant for walking and rolling within. The OCP Also talks about widening out to up to 2.5 meters in mixed use and commercial areas. And also worth highlighting 8.2.6F, which also talks about a desire to separate sidewalks from moving vehicles. And that could be achieved with on-street parking, which generally along this corridor is not provided and is probably not appropriate on a road with as much traffic. But other opportunities include landscape and bike lanes, which especially bike lanes are being considered as part of this initiative. Another policy specific to road improvements. So there's language seeking the application of complete streets principles. And the idea of complete streets principles is that streets are designed to enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for all users of all ages, abilities, and modes of transportation. Term complete streets is very much applicable here, as is, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, is the concept of all ages and abilities. The acronym is AAA. And that's something, especially when we talk about active travel modes, that's a term that's now been woven into design standards. And it's really kind of the gold standard, we'll say, in terms of pedestrian and cycling facility design. Your transportation master plan. So it obviously deals at the citywide network level. It also prescribes or proposes crossings for many of your major roads, Souk Road included. And so the visual on the right is what is shown for this portion of Souk Road. TMP talks about maintaining the 4 travel lanes that are currently in place. There's no on-street parking on this stretch of road. It identifies Souk Road as part of the frequent transit network. It identifies buffered bike lanes. So those are shown on the cross-section graphic. It's a 1.8 meter cycling lane area, buffered by just over 2 feet from the travel lane. So there's actual linear separation between traveling vehicles and cyclists. And then the TMP also talks about 2 meter sidewalks along the entire lane. So there's a bit of background. So now getting specifically into the transit priority initiative that's on the table. Graphic on the screen is showing we'll say the menu of transit priority opportunities. On the left-hand side, it can be things that are relatively simple, like signal coordination or preemption that'll give priority to buses as they approach intersections to allow them to make their headways through key intersections. All the way up to fully separated right-of-ways, which is not on the table here, but things like bus lanes, queue jumpers are being given consideration as well. So this slide is probably familiar to you. James Wadsworth, who is on the line today, also presented this slide to you back in. And so just to reiterate, the 3 options that are on the table, and I think we all have a pretty good handle on what they are, but it's option 1, which is in the inbound or the eastbound direction. It's a shared HOV, shared bus HOV lane. And so the idea with that is that you would have 2 lanes inbound or 2 lanes eastbound, one of which would be dedicated for buses and high occupancy vehicles. The other lane would be a typical travel lane. And then on the outbound or the westbound direction, you'd still have your 2 general purpose travel lanes. This option with the space that's available can achieve a 1.8 meter bike lane, as well as a 1.8 meter sidewalk. And so we do have a basic pedestrian and cyclist accommodation. Option 2 is the shared bus and bike lane option. And it's been batted about. It's Douglas Street through parts of City Victoria are kind of the best case for that. And so the street configuration is 3 lanes in the eastbound or the inbound direction. 2 would be general purpose travel lanes. 1 would be the bus/bike lane. And then in the outbound or in the westbound, we'd still have 2 general purpose travel lanes. This option can achieve, it's the most constrained of the 3 options, but it still can achieve basic sidewalk accommodation. And then cyclist accommodation is in the eastbound or outbound inbound direction is achieved in the shared space with buses. So the idea is buses and bikes would travel in line with one another until a bus pulled out to a stop to drop off or pick up. There's a sufficient space in that lane that a cyclist could overtake the stopped bus if they chose to. And so that is a little bit of space intensive, and that's really where the constraint of this option comes in. Cyclist accommodation in the outbound or the westbound direction would be in the form of a conventional painted bike lane. The third option is the counterflow option. And so this basically involves repurposing specific travel lanes at different times a day so that we can achieve a dedicated bus lane on the inbound direction in the AM when we need it. And then we're back to more or less the status quo situation, off-peak or non-AM peak hour. With this option, we have the space to achieve, again, basic sidewalk provision as well as painted bike lanes at 1.8 meters. And so both pedestrians and cyclists are accommodated as well. So this was touched on a little bit earlier, but some of the advantages and specifically the disadvantages of each option to be fully aware of. And much of this came up already, but with option one, the shared HOV bus lane, worth acknowledging that there is no downstream HOV facility. And so while there is benefit to high occupancy vehicles for this stretch of Sooke Road, they're still back into general purpose travel lanes through along the Old Island Highway, through Colwood and through View Royal and in. So there is some benefit, but it is limited to this section of road. And then also a drawback to this option one is the loss of a general purpose lane in the inbound direction, which queuing and delay will result for vehicle traffic, single occupant vehicle traffic as a result. Option two, I suppose one of the key characteristics there is in terms of the cyclist experience, they are sharing the lane in one direction, in the eastbound, inbound direction with buses. And so that can be daunting for the less aggressive, the less confident cyclists. And so potentially a lesser cycling experience with that. And then another key characteristic here is, I mentioned this option two is the most constrained of the three options. And so we have some narrower general purpose travel lanes. And in our mind, that's got both drawback in that Colwood residents and folks using this corridor might be less comfortable or less used to traveling in 3-meter lanes. You'll see that downtown Victoria. You'll see that in very select parts of the region, but it's not common. Fully functional, but less comfortable. Perhaps the pro of the narrower lanes is the expectation that people will travel a little bit slower, and that's not a bad thing at all. In option three, which is the counterflow option, I mean, the biggest drawback here is that there's a requirement for both infrastructure in terms of overhead messaging signs that indicate what the intended direction of travel is by time of day. That'll have to be dynamic, and that'll be something that is got quite a price tag attached to it. It'll be complex. It'll be a learning curve for folks who aren't used to a treatment like that. We don't see that elsewhere in the region, as well as some issues with queuing resulting in the outbound or the westbound direction. Okay, so switching gears just a little bit. I just wanted to talk a little bit to some of the active transportation best practices. This stuff has been evolving quite rapidly, especially on the cycling side of things over the last 4, 5, 6 years. And it's important we understand that what we're planning for here and sort of what the trade-offs we might be making are in terms of active transportation accommodation relative to general purpose vehicle traffic relative to public transit as well. And so I'm going to go through a few slides with visuals that have been mostly pulled from the BC Active Transportation Design Guide, which is a provincial guidelines document that was finalized about a year ago. It's now referenced throughout the province. And so what's being shown on the screen here is pedestrian facility best practices. On the left side, you see what are considered all ages and abilities facilities, AAA. That's an off-street pathway, which we're not really on the table here, but what is enhanced separated sidewalks or separated sidewalks. The key being the sidewalk is not right up against the curb and the roadway. And so that's what you're seeing in the two photos, enhanced and separated sidewalk. And then non-AAA facilities, supporting facilities, those are shown, the two on the right, are non-separated sidewalks, which essentially are what are on Sooke Road right now, where the sidewalk is right up against vehicle traffic, as well as walkable shoulders, which is kind of a more rural treatment. And so to note, in our pursuit of AAA facilities, they're space intensive. That additional space required to achieve that separation does take space, and we are dealing with constrained road right of way that has a lot of pressure on it to serve multiple modes. But important to understand this concept. Also from the provincial guide on the left is a tool that is used to determine what, based on a few key characteristics, what the most appropriate or the preferred facility type would be. This is the road type. We are dealing with an arterial road on the Sooke Road. On the horizontal, the bottom axis is motor vehicle speed. We're typically dealing with motor vehicle speed of 50 or 60 kilometers an hour. Based on those characteristics, they suggest that a separated sidewalk is appropriate. Right, here's an example from Saanich showing what a separated sidewalk looks like. 1.8 meter concrete sidewalk separated from the roadway by at least 2 feet of, and it really depends on what you want to achieve in that space, but often street trees, landscape, in this case on Tattersall in Saanich, there's also a stormwater management function to it as well. And so just an example on the right of what that actually looks like. Granted, it's very space intensive. Moving over to cycling. On the screen are some of the cycling facility types, some bike lane configurations, I suppose. The ones that are a neighborhood bikeway is shown top left. This is typically reserved for residential neighborhood environment where vehicles are low. So we're more concerned here with, on the middle and bottom left, protected bike lanes and painted or buffered bike lanes. These are more commonly found on locations with higher vehicle volumes or speeds. So similar graph on the left-hand side to the pedestrian facility graph I showed earlier. On the vertical axis is the number of vehicles per day. So I introduced earlier, we're upwards of 20,000 vehicles plus on this stretch of road. We are extending off the top of this graph. And then in terms of motor vehicle speeds on the horizontal axis, we're again in the 50 to 60 kilometer vehicle speed. And so the provincial guidance would be that a road in this context with these characteristics would best suit either a multi-use pathway if we had the space or a protected bike lane. And so at the right showed a couple cross-section examples of what protected and buffered bike lanes typically look like, or what desired criteria are for those. Is 1.8 to 2 meter bike lane with a physical separation of at least 2 feet, 0.6 meters between the roadway and the bike facility. And the buffered bike lane, the spatial criteria are actually quite similar. You can comfortably get away with a 2-foot buffer between the travel lane and the bike lane. The key being here is we're not seeing necessarily the cost and the infrastructure involved with a protected bike lane, but we are achieving separation for the cyclist from traveling vehicles with a lateral space with a painted buffer in it. So that's what's shown with the buffered bike lane on the right. Okay, so with that, I wanted to kind of bring it back to the exercise at hand. This is an exercise about understanding the competing interests and giving direction on what the trade-offs might be. The competing interests are transit accommodation, transit priority on this corridor, walking and cycling, active transportation facilities, I suppose a desire for AAA, all ages and abilities facilities, but real trade-offs involved in the constrained space and what we can achieve within it. Also want to be considering vehicle and traffic conditions. And so this isn't meant to be a plan to degrade traffic performance. It's more about managing it and making sure that we're being strategic strategic with how we influence how traffic performs so that we can potentially address other multimodal goals. And I think the last set of bullets at the bottom is often forgotten and overlooked, but anytime you're making an investment in infrastructure, it is an opportunity to address broader objectives. And so in this case, that might include placemaking type objectives like creating space for street trees and boulevards, opportunities to manage your stormwater, and thinking about community aspects like aesthetics and neighborhood livability. So bringing it back to our discussion points at hand, we would like to reaffirm or discuss the application of the OCP modal hierarchy along the Sooke Road corridor. So does it still apply? The hierarchy is shown on the screen from highest to lowest, highest being walking, through transit, cycling, goods movement, autonomous and high occupancy vehicles, lastly to single occupant vehicles. We want to reaffirm that this is still the direction council sees through the OCP for this corridor. We know that, and this was talked about a little bit prior to this slide deck, that BC Transit is looking to move forward with a preferred option in the near term. There will, however, be the opportunity at a later date to receive, review, comment, and approve a final design. So we're not doing that today, but we are giving direction to priorities along that corridor. And so our potential direction to BC Transit, and this is up to the committee, is that council affirms the application of the OCP modal hierarchy policy along the Sooke Road corridor for the purposes of facilitating the next phase of BC Transit's design exercise to incorporate transit improvements on Sooke Road between Metchosin and Jerome Roads. So with that, I'll conclude. I'm happy to field questions on some of the technical material that was presented. Also very keen to get into a discussion on the modal hierarchy priorities along this corridor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. That's great. And I see much to discuss here. All right, we have a collection of hands already. Let's start off with Councillor Day.
Great, thank you. We were going through our OCP requirements, and the OCP talks about 2-meter sidewalks with priority for wheelchairs and mobility scooters. And the area that we're talking about is one where I do often see scooters and electric wheelchairs traveling in both directions. And those may be on the same side of the street because it is difficult to cross the busy road. So it isn't like the sidewalks are one directional. In the plan, it talks about 1.8 or 1.5 meter options for the sidewalks along Sooke Road. And I'm just wondering how that works in terms of allowing 2 scooters or 2 wheelchairs to pass one another on the same side.
Good. Excellent question. Excellent comment. Now at the provincial level, the guidance is that 1.8 meters is what's needed for 2 wheelchairs to pass in opposing directions. And so anything south of, anything narrower than 1.8 meters isn't going to accommodate that. So worth acknowledging that the 1.8 means clear walking or rolling space. It doesn't mean 1.8 and then put benches or garbage bins or hydro poles. It's 1.8. Now you can have little widening outs along the way. We're not imagining steady streams of mobility scooters or wheelchairs opposing directions, but where they're interacting, where they're meeting one another, 1.8 or more is what's needed for them to get around one another.
Okay. And also there's a comparison between the protected bike lanes and the buffered bike lanes. But both take the same amount of real estate. In other words, 0.2 meters. for either. And I'm wondering what the impact might be of putting some areas of protection in, because I've noticed many of the cyclists along Souk Road having to ride up onto the sidewalk. For example, the last one I saw was just a couple of days ago by Thrifty Foods, and they were westbound, but the cars were, well, I guess it's quite narrow there, and they had to take refuge up on the sidewalk because they were feeling very unsafe in that corridor. And that's been something that I've heard over the years a number of times about the lack of safety along that corridor. So I'm just wondering, is there an opportunity to do a little bit of each? So I recognize that the buffered bike lanes would be much easier where there's a transit stop, but maybe some protections where you go around a curve, for example, so that cars are less likely to wander across the paint and into the cycling lane.
So short answer is yes. You can kind of do a hybrid of buffered into protected back into buffered. You mentioned it, the protected at bus stops. That's where it starts to break down a little bit. Also driveway crossings, and there are a fair number of driveway crossings up and down this corridor. But it's more, to be honest, it is more about creating that lateral space. You know, you can get away with as little as 0.6 or 0.7 meters in this form of either a buffer or an area for physical protection. It is really about, can we carve out that space to achieve that buffering or that protection?
So you're saying you don't think it makes any difference to the cyclist if the car can drive over the paint, or if the car comes up against a curb that it can't drive over?
No, protected would always be, from a purely cyclist perspective, would be more beneficial.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, it's Ian Burhiller.
And he's muted.
I was trying to be polite. Yes. Go ahead, Ian. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to add to Mr. Casey's response to Councillor Day's question about the width of sidewalks. So in conversations with BC Transit, the concept that would see shared bus bike lanes would allow for 1.8 meter sidewalks for the vast majority of the corridor. There'd only be some very limited areas, several power poles they suspect would be the areas that would go below 1.8.
And thanks for the clarity, Ian. Over to you, Mayor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple questions to stay on what Councillor Day was talking about. Can we, as especially electrical vehicles continue to improve, and I'm talking about electrical bikes, and specifically electric bikes that are considered scooters but can't get licensed as motor vehicles, do we have an expectation that they will be using they will be using the bike path? And is that considered legal? Is that considered part of the roadway? Is it not? I'd like a clarification on that. In addition to that, in regards to mobility scooters, as the speed increases on some of these mobility scooters, does it become at all appropriate for them to start using the bike lane versus the sidewalk?
So through the chair, may I interject?
Go ahead. Thanks, Brent.
I just want to point out that where we're at here with BC Transit here is initial concept design review. So some of the details on 1815 sidewalk or the use of lanes is not part of what's being contemplated here as of right now. We're sitting prior to we're sitting at about 30% and looking to get the initial acknowledgement from committee members as to how to progress to 60%. So staff and Mr. Casey as a consultant don't have the detailed information yet, which bring about some of the discussions we're at. However, electric scooters, to address Mayor Martin's concern, they are considered a user of an acceptable lane, and just like a bike can be accommodated within a lane or can be accommodated in the travel service of the roadway, just like any other users of the roadway. But I just wanted to bring some clarification to the level of information that staff or even the consultants engaged may be aware of at the present time. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Thanks, Brent, for the clarity. And we are looking for an affirmation of that list that's straight from our OCP. And perhaps we can limit our discussion to that as opposed to specific design guidelines.
Certainly. I guess part of the reason I was asking that question is because I'm trying to understand why I would want to consider a non-separated sidewalk versus a separated sidewalk, and understanding the importance of keeping those people safe in that bike lane or not bike lane. So I do apologize if I got too far into the weeds on that.
No, fair enough. Yep.
If we want to come back to, I guess where I'm struggling with this specifically in regards to the discussion points and reconfirming the hierarchy within the OCP, I'm struggling to understand why I would be prioritizing walking and cycling above single occupancy vehicles in regards to specifically Sooke Road. I understand the principles from an OCP standpoint of the community, but would I want to slow single vehicle cars down because I am prioritizing walking and cycling? And my answer would be no. Am I misunderstanding the hierarchy of priorities?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Hi, Mr. Chair, Ian Burhill here.
Go ahead, Ian.
Hi. Yeah, I think as Mr. Casey said in the opening of his presentation, the hierarchy of modes in the OCP are really to guide infrastructure decisions. And in this case, we've got a series of options that would create winners and losers in terms of the different modes that are being hosted in this roadway. So for instance, there would be an impact to general vehicle traffic through the creation of a bus lane, in that center left turn lane would be removed. So you can see in that sense, we are reducing the accessibility of the corridor to single occupancy vehicles through this initiative. So we're not necessarily talking about taking away a lane, but we are reducing to some extent, as an example, access of single occupancy vehicles.
Okay, so and sorry, Chair, this will be my final remark, and then I'll shut up. I guess and again, from a transit standpoint, I am comfortable that we are prioritizing transit above single occupancy vehicles on Sooke Road. Mm-hmm. I am not comfortable with that we are prioritizing walking or cycling above single occupancy vehicles on specifically Sooke Road. And I'll end it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. Very poignant comments. And I think that we're expected to try and split the difference a little bit here, keep traffic moving, but also provide some safe alternatives. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Chair Jensen. A question for Mr. Casey and maybe staff here on this. You gave us the three options and you clearly identified the option number 3 as being the most expensive. What about the other two options? Are they about the same, or is one cheaper than the other? That's question number 1. Question number 2, rough order of magnitude of what this is going to cost. And related to that, question number 3, because I'm not too sure myself, is that considered our responsibility, that road? So are the citizens of Colwood on the hook for that, or is this provincial, or is there part provincial? So can you just clarify that for me?
Brent, I see a hand up.
Thank you very much to the chair. That was from before, because that's some great questions, Councillor Kobayashi. Just looking at our attendees to see if James is still on the call. James, are you still there? No. So seeing that he's not, BC Transit initiatives for the widening and the purposes have been explained to me are under the hook of BC Transit. Stop upgrades and continual maintenance of those stops, pedestrian ways and sidewalks are the city's undertaking. So from what I understand, Councillor Kobayashi, is that the cost of any land acquisition that may be necessary as negotiated is BC Transit. However, the pedestrian and stop upgrade at the physical stop itself may come down to a partnership between the city and transit. But I do understand that their costs are their costs to implement and our costs are ours to maintain.
How about the, as far as the options, option 1 and 2, if you were to compare the two, which one's the more expensive option?
They're both actually quite costly, and that's why we need to move the design factor from where we're at into 60% so we can start to understand. We've heard today that there's minor conflicts with some BC hydro poles, and so there is significant cost in each way, with option 1 being the favored choice, primarily because of the cost-benefit relationship. But what I don't have in front of me is the specificity of that difference, but I think that we'll get that as we work closer with the derivative of this meeting.
Thanks, Councillor Kobayashi. Ian, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to Mr. Mueller's response, so option 2, which is Transit's preferred by far, they've said is their preferred option, is partially preferred because of cost implications. And we should keep in mind at this point, the costs of construction are proposed to be completely borne by the by BC Transit, not the city.
Is that it, Doug? Thanks. And Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Chair. So in the spirit of confirming the modal hierarchy within the OCP, I can say I'm a big supporter of the sidewalks. I think it's important to have generous sidewalks. So I would say that the 2 meters or even the 2.5 in the Colwood Corners area, I would strongly support those. I'd very much like to see them separated, you know, even maybe not that much, but when we talk about hydro poles and there'll be light standards and other things, let's have a little bit of a buffer in there. So if they were separated from the road, that would be excellent in my opinion. I guess I'm a supporter of the shared bike bus lanes. And here's what I'm thinking is this project, whatever it is going to take a long time. We're looking at our cycle infrastructure. I think the plan is to start that in the 3rd quarter or something and work on that. I would hope that as we do that, we will be able to find an awful lot of corridors for east-west bicycle movement without using Sooke Road. Sooke Road, not a very comfortable ride. I would think, you know, Ocean Boulevard would be a better ride. Perhaps Wishart, if we could extend past the school and through Royal Roads up to Galloping Goose would be good. Perhaps even Metchosin jumping over Sooke to the other Metchosin and through that little subdivision there and across the graveyard to the Galloping Goose. So there's options that we could, for a lot less money than widening out Sooke Road, provide better cycling infrastructure. But you know, things will progress if we start for the first number of years with a shared bike bus transit lane. It may just become in time that the demands of that are such that we kick the bikes out and make them take another route. So that's kind of where I'm thinking. So I guess just to go back and summarize, I think the supporting at this point the shared bus bike lane, ideally a separated sidewalk. Maybe in some places we have to wait for a while to acquire some land. Maybe we have to acquire it now. And let's see if we can't over time create some better cycle routes that don't require the use of Sooke Road for at least this section that we're talking about here today. So that's it. And again, just to reiterate what I was talking to Mr. Wadsworth about is let's be careful that we don't make the easy decisions on the east side of the road that force us into some really, really difficult ones when it's time to do the west side of the road. Let's optimize, look at what we're going to do in the future, even if we don't really know what it is yet, and go from there. So that's my 2 cents worth there, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. And just a point that hasn't come up yet, but in the preparation for this meeting, it was shared with me that the statistics don't support this same level of engineering coming back home in the afternoon because the return times are so spread out. Is the way that was explained to me, Stuart, when I asked the question about coming back on the westbound side.
And you know what? And that's exactly what Mr. Wadsworth said to me. I understand that, but let's not pretend it's never. I mean, we're looking at some pretty major growth in this part of the world. So we should expect that at some point, and maybe that'll give us time. Maybe there's some right of way to be acquired over time, or some decisions that we've got years before we have to make. But let's at least know what we're getting into and not go into it blindly.
Sounds great. And we'll go with Councillor Logan first. I think he hasn't had a chance yet. Cynthia.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate Stuart's comments about maybe looking at a separate corridor away from Suk Road as an alternative. I kind of like that. But kind of along the bike lane thing, Dan, would a two-way bike lane make any difference in terms of right-of-way requirement?
Good question. And I can't say I've explored this on this corridor in any level of detail at all. Neither do the BC Transit options, but generally, yes, you don't need, it's basically you need one buffer in width, and by putting them both on the same side as opposed to buffers on both sides. So you save whatever that single buffer width would have been. That's typically speaking.
Right. Okay, thank you. I was just curious. I kind of thought that, but I don't know what the impact is or what the how desirous it is for cyclists. But so I do appreciate that, and I know it's not for this discussion, but the other thing that when we get down to design that I worry about is the highway feel of this corridor, and trying to make our best efforts to soften that hard look along that corridor, so because it's going through our city center, so to speak. So, but I appreciate the comments. Thank you, Dan.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted a bit of clarification. I heard after I asked my questions that the center left turn lane would be removed, and that has generated a lot of discussion from residents on both sides of Suk Road who really feel that that center left turn lane is incredibly important to them being able to access Suk Road because of the volume of traffic that you can really only cross half of the road at a time. So I'd just like to know if there will be some careful design and consideration given to looking at, there's a few specific areas where there is housing developments on both sides of the road and not really any easy way in or out if that center lane were removed.
Yeah, I'm happy, Dan Casey here, happy to speak to that. So the baseline version of all of the three options that are being shown generally do not include center left turn lanes. There may be exceptions on portions where the road widens out a little bit and there's room for it. But generally, if you need to make the left turn, you would be in the center lane and you would wait till you find a gap in the oncoming vehicles to then go. And whether that happens immediately or whether you have to end up queuing there and through vehicles queue up behind you would largely depend on the time of the day and how busy it is. But that would be the configuration under most of these. There would be exceptions where it does get wider and maybe it's some of the more congested key intersections.
Yeah, so as you described that to me didn't fit with my understanding of reading the presentation materials. Because basically, if you consider it 5 lanes right now, and you thought that each lane would be 3 meters wide, then you're looking at 15 meters, and that even with adding your buffered bike lanes and your sidewalks on both sides, that still fits within the right of way as described between 22 and 24 meters for the whole corridor. So I think it is critical in a number of areas, not just for somebody, you know, driving, say they're driving westbound and they want to turn left to go home. But so yes, they could wait and signal, but that same person wanting to go west from their home could not achieve it without a center lane for what would the just a refuge area for them to get across 2 lanes, wait until there's an opening, and then get into the line of traffic. And that I've seen that be an issue in the day, at night, especially around Kelly Road. And there's a number of amenities there that attract occasionally large numbers of vehicles for events in the evening, whether it's the Children's Hall or the Women's Institute buildings. So and also the residences that are there. So I'm just concerned that we need to have a plan that takes those issues into consideration. And I liked Councillor Parkinson's thoughts on figuring out the cycling options elsewhere. But I also think it's important for us to remember that the traffic on that road is often driving 70, 80 kilometers per hour. And it's not appropriate. There is a school there. There is a school crossing. There is a need for school crossing guards. So with our design, we both need to make it efficient, but also not just a rat run through Colwood. It's loud, it's noisy, it's unsafe when it's operating in that way. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another series of hands. I'm going to go to, sorry, Brent and or Ian. Do you have a response to Councillor Day's inquiry?
Thank you very much. And through the chair, Sooke Road is an incredibly challenging environment, largely because of the fact that the right-of-way is not consistent, as described at either 20, 24 or other meters. It fluctuates in and out based upon land takes over the time. And so that's why we're looking for the hierarchy to be reinforced as opposed to a dimension to be reinforced, because there'll be times where we have to go narrower. And you heard Mr. Casey and James speak to narrowing a sidewalk in certain sections. And I also think that there will be in the future restricted movements along Sooke Road, specifically from some of those driveways and some of those access points. If we were going to start to declare controlled access highways, Veterans Memorial Parkway would definitely be one. Sooke Road will be another, as well as Latoria perhaps, and another place. And that's to keep the movement of vehicles, I guess, appropriately assigned. And so I think that one of the main necessities of this consideration today is the hierarchy of choices, because there will be pluses and minuses in each case. And we would come back at further design review to talk about those implications. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian, anything further? I'd like to.
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to add another reminder in terms of this corridor being designated as a transit growth area. So that OCP policy states that we're going to be looking at this as an area of significant redevelopment. So we're combining the transit infrastructure with a progressive approach to redevelopment so that they're mutually supportive. And it also mentioned that that we are still in very much early days, as Mr. Mahler said, with respect to the design of this road. But suffice to say, transit in conversations with staff have stated they don't expect the intersections to have restricted left-hand turns through the implementation of option 2.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Logan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To get us moving along, I will move the wording in the slide deck that council affirms the application of the OCP modal hierarchy policy along the Sooke Road corridor for the purposes of facilitating the next phase of BC Transit's design exercise to incorporate transit improvements on Sooke Road between Metchosin and Jerome Road, and further that the city's preference is option 2, which is the EV shared bus and bike lane.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. No seconder required. Discussion, Mayor Martin, you have something on the motion?
I do, thank you. So through you, Chair, to staff, can I please get a clarification? I've already spoken to why I'm concerned about prioritizing walking and cycling on Sooke Road as it being our main artery road to actually move vehicles. And it seems strange to me that we're prioritizing walking and cycling on our main artery of how we're trying to move people in and out of our community. And yet we're going to prioritize it as the lowest ability or lowest importance is to actually move those vehicles back and forth. Will decisions be made? So for example, a decision to build a sidewalk, and we understand that that is now going to lower the movement of vehicles down from 50 kilometers an hour to 45 kilometers an hour because of the way the walking and cycling is being designed. Does that mean that that will be prioritized over the vehicles?
Through the chair, yes.
Okay, thank you. Saying that, I won't support the motion then.
Hi, Mr. Chair, could I jump in?
Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, so the modal, if I could just add to the last response, the modal hierarchies really are there as a guide and not meant to set up confrontation situations where we're reprogramming a street that has existing heavy traffic volume. So there would be major implications to not only the traffic flows, but goods movements, the reduction of the overall function of the corridor if existing traffic volumes weren't taken into consideration with these decisions. So suffice to say, the modal hierarchy is not meant to be something that would be applied in a way that would disrupt the use of arterial roads like Sooke Road.
And I think just to append to that, in my experience, Mr. Mayor, that if we extract bicycles and buses from the 2 through lanes into their own lane, it can also have a desirous effect for the rest of traffic. And a lot of times what we see in these suggested improvements like this is a reduction in the number of lanes. So I'm pleased to see that there isn't a reduction in the number of lanes. Maybe some narrowing, but I think there's an added benefit to commuting traffic if we're pulling the bikes out of obstructing the second lane. I think that we might move things even better. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the motion, but I just want to make sure that as staff works with BC Transit, they keep in mind the points that have been raised here about hopefully a separated sidewalk, thinking of other routes for cycling, and worrying about a place for the vertical infrastructure, the street lights, fire hydrants, stuff like that. So I don't think it needs a separate motion as long as staff has heard those points and includes them in their further discussions with BC Transit.
Thanks, Stuart, and don't forget garbage cans.
Never could forget garbage cans, Dean.
Welcome back, Councillor Baxter, and go ahead.
So I'll be supporting the motion, especially because it includes a choice of option, which I hope deals largely with the mayor's concern, although I see his concern about reducing speeds. However, Souk Road, at least for part of it, is in our town center. And I can't imagine having a town center without sidewalks. That's an essential part of being a town center. It's unfortunate that such a heavy traffic load goes through the town center and that there isn't along most of it a parallel alternative as there would be in, say, a city built on a grid. But if you, in order to keep the traffic, the vehicle size lanes the same, you don't deal with bikes and only deal very badly with pedestrians. What's their alternative? I bike that route quite often, and I end up biking through Royal Roads, which is kind of, you're biking through woods and it's a very slow and roundabout route compared to going down Souk Road, but Souk Road is just too dangerous right now. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you,
Excuse me.
Councillor Baxter. And without further ado, I'd like to call the motion as presented by Councillor Logan. Anyone opposed, please raise your hand. And we have Mayor Martin in opposition. Thank you very much. The motion passes. Find my agenda here. On to 5.2, roadway data collection and monitoring, Blue Toad introduction. And Mr. Molnar, you are up.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I've got a minor PowerPoint presentation, so I'm just going to work to get that up and running for us, if I can find it, and we'll go from there. So just give me a second to find them. Sorry. Apologies for this. It's not coming up that quickly. There we go. I'm just going to start that again. Isn't that funny? Sorry, guys. Excuse me for just one second while I've got too many screens running here, and so just
Amanda, can you share that on his behalf, perhaps?
Oh no, I can get it going.
Okay.
Just give me a second. My apologies. It was up and running a second ago, but now it appears to not be. So what we've got going on here is the city through its 2020 and 2021 budget, and I'm just going to get so I can share the screen. There it is. Okay, can you see it?
Something's coming up here. There we go.
Okay, excellent. Okay, there. Sorry for that, and hope you can see what I've got in front, which is our introductory page for our data collection and monitoring system. So through the 2020 through 2024 budget considerations, Council awarded a budget of $100,000 to start gaining more data and data collection on our streets and roads. One of those systems is the Blue Toad system, which is the system that we've now ordered and are planning to implement along our corridors. What this system does is it stretches to streetlights, and it gives us interactive real-time speed maps. It allows for the city staff as well as the public to view it. So as they're planning their morning commute, frankly, they can make a choice based on what's going on our roads, streets, and intersections. It provides all users of the system travel time reliability, because you know where your points of conflict are. And it is available to produce a report. So staff can, at any time of the year, look to provide information to council or committee as to the functionality of how our streets are working. And even if we looked at some of the last considerations for BC Transit, we could look to see how Souk Road is changing in terms of its dynamics over the course of time. One of the other advantages of the Bluetooth system above other systems is that it enables origin and destination studies by capturing Bluetooth signal technologies and frankly mapping it through the intersections. So through the budgets that's been enabled, we were able to look at 8 different points within the city for implementing this system. And so we looked at our borders to start out with, using Souk Road at the Langford border and then at the north border against View Royal. And then we looked at how traffic was going to move throughout the city with the focus on Souk Road. If we contextualize some of the comments that we've heard over the last many months, it's about traffic congestion at Latoria and Wishart, the growth and development of South Colwood as it's experienced through Veterans Memorial Parkway, traffic implications at Machosen Road. And it's very difficult for staff to speak to what's contributing from development directly or what is the growth over time and how are people actually using our roads, even so far as some of the implications that, or some of the recent discussions about Ocean Boulevard. We've had feedback on people relying on that route for beauty and enjoyment, park use, but we've also had the reach out from our community that speaks to it being a community or pass-through route. And we had Dan Casey with Urban Systems also speak to the volume of traffic. So if we look at the network that we're trying to establish around the city, and we focus at our borders or even the Machosen intersection, the Latoria intersection with Machosen Road, that's how we've helped to pick out these locations. So we'll be able to monitor people as they come into the area and then basically head through Colwood and out the other side without gathering information about the peoples, just the fact that a Bluetooth signal has been picked up. So there's a list of intersections that we're studying this year, and there's plans to extend that next year as well and into 2022, in which case then we'll have most of our systems and internal network mapped out. So that is essentially the slideshow that's for today. We'll go back to that portion that speaks about how we spread about the municipality. And if you'd like any questions about how the data collection works or what we're hoping to gain from it, I'm here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brent. Councillor Parkinson.
This is probably a silly question for such a sophisticated system, but as I understand it, it counts cell phone signals. So how does it differentiate a car with a single occupant versus a car with 4 occupants, all with cell phones on the go? And second question would be on the budget, whether the future works are included within the $100,000 approved or whether you'll be looking for more money in the future to extend the system.
Thank you very much. So the system, through the chair, Councillor Parkinson, the system is not intelligent in the terms of, 1 car per signal. It simply picks up Bluetooth signals. So even a cyclist is going to trigger a movement, albeit a slow movement. So transit and many people with devices in their pockets, it'll be picked up if they're on Bluetooth signals. And so it's mostly create heat maps and then pass through intentions. Somebody on a bus, we would just pick up as 24 signals in that bulk area. So we'll take some interpreting of the data that comes back to provide actual ridership. It'll be more vital for origin and destination, where we'll actually know how people are commuting through our municipality and city. So for example, we could find out at the end of the day how many Colwoodians are choosing Souk Road, choosing Veterans Memorial Parkway, or choosing to use Ocean Boulevard, for example. The intent of the budget so far is fully captured this year. 100,000 was awarded through council consideration. It'll be fully spent this year. So next year, if we find the system to be advantageous, it'll be a separate and new budget item for another. If we did 8 units, I would ask for another $100,000 for next year.
Thanks, Brent. And sorry, go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, well, we can discuss next year's budget at the time. I guess as you looked at other systems, are they all like this? They can count cell phone systems, but they can't really count cars. It just, if there's 10 full buses going down an empty road, it might scare people off thinking it's all individual cars. So just wondering if there's alternates or if that's just the best system that's out there.
There's lots of different alternate systems, however, very few that actually capture the origin destination information and then be able to display it in real time, which this system is planning to do. Truly to be able to target out how many people cross a signal It's a complement of a bunch of series of system. So we've already got our speed reader information, that are speed tabs that are out there. That is a signal that's basically being crossed by a vehicle or being recorded, which triggers one. This will show multiple users in a bus, but because it's origin and destination, we'll see that they're all traveling together in a mass and be able to extrapolate out of that information. And so as we go forward in years, we're hoping to not only augment the origin and destination information so we can understand how people shop or use or recreate in our streets and are using our streets, but we're actually looking to couple that with our speed reader program and bring about some different technology as well, because there's newer technology than some of the signboards that we've got that'll all add together to give us a complete data set for what our streets are doing.
Thank you.
Councillor Day.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been already answered, at least partially. So I do recall us putting this in the budget. I don't remember any discussion, but that at council of making any choices about what specific system that we went with, but that may just be because it was at a meeting that I missed or something. But did council have a hand in choosing this particular system that you've implemented?
No, the system, the council had a hand in establishing the budget, and staff was given opportunity to go and research what it needed.
Okay. So I find that just a little concerning, because I think that council should be more involved than just approving the budget and staff go out and spend it. So, and I'm concerned that we're not, we're only capturing who has a cell phone. We're not capturing people who don't have cell phones, and we're not capturing all of our users as per our modal hierarchy. So I'm hoping that with refinements, this will turn into something that captures what we need to know. But I was of the understanding quite a few years ago now that we were going to be moving towards smarter lights at the intersections, where they would actually use some video capture to know how many people are waiting at an intersection, how far back things are getting backed up. And I don't think I ever considered cell phones as an idea for capturing that, but I'm hopeful that we could get some more realistic data, because the issue seems to me to be one of coordination and trying to make our roadways smarter, so that we can shave off those seconds that aren't needed for a light to stay green when there's nobody there, and things like that, to make our commuting smarter and have our intersections work more smoothly together. So I'm looking forward to what you can bring forward.
Go ahead, Mr. Molnar.
Through the chair, thank you very much, Councillor Day, for raising that. We are looking to bring about camera technology on intersections. We installed it at Ryder Hedgestall, at Machosa, or at Latoria Road as an intersection insofar, and we're looking to do that with the Ani upgrade as well of the Goldstream intersection, as well as we continue on and amend our development and servicing bylaw, is where that'll be captured. That technology is largely counters. And this is exactly, this system that we're talking about here, the Bluetooth system, is exactly where you bring about the smart technology. So the coupling of the smart technology of how people are using the roads, where they're going and how they're getting there, that is the origin and destination information. So exactly like what the debates we've had about who's using what street, are they using it for a cut through, are they using it to serve businesses, is the sort of information that we'll be able to bring to bear with the Bluetooth technology that you've got in front of you. Add to that increased awareness at intersections like counting technology. We're also looking to install bike counters in bike lanes once we get more of them established, and pedestrian counters on pedestrian routes. We'll start to couple with ridership information to BC Transit to create a much fuller picture. Now, staff have got and have received periodically over years ridership information. And we're looking to bring that together with some of our sidewalk projects so we can start to see how our road improvements are scheduled and brought in about the traffic that's using the road, where they're coming from, and give council that choice as we go forward. So yes, this is an expanding system, and this is the introduction of smart technology. So we hope that we all find benefit from it.
Thank you, Brent. So I think is there a motion attached to this one, Brent? I don't recall.
Through the chair, no, there's not. Thank you very much, Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. And on to item 5.3, speed reduction initiatives. Brent, is that you?
Yep, that one's me as well. Thanks very much. I will attempt to go through the share screen session again. And we saw how well that worked last time.
It's all right. We all need a break anyways.
I'm getting it up. Just give me a second. So this initiative was one that was brought forward earlier in the year by Saanich. And the city has received recent communication from Saanich about asking if we would like to be a part of that. So just going to have it up and running. Can you all see the presentation in front of you?
Looks good, but it's not in presentation mode.
All right. What about if I go to the next slide? Still in on a presentation mode?
No.
Okay, my apologies. So I will figure out how to get that one going too. Gotta love the technology. 1 second. Won't let me do it. No. Okay. I can't even actually get that back. Oh, there we go. Okay. New share. And then I will pick. Oh, so frustrating. Can you see my tabletop now?
We have your desktop there. Yep.
Okay. I'm just gonna. My Zoom disappears once I get it going. So I'm going to say I'm screen sharing, new share, and I'm going to screen share that one. Okay, now what do you see? It's all. Yes,
we see your slides up here.
Still the presentation?
Not in presentation mode, no.
Sorry, guys. Do you see the presentation now?
Yeah, better.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Sorry,
Yes.
it looks good. Looks good. Are you muted? Am I muted?
No, Dean, I can't. I've lost it all now, and I'm in the office trying to work it. Okay, we may just have to go off of this.
Why don't you unshare that, and we'll
All right.
see if
Anyone can.
Matt can help there.
Sorry, Councillor Jensen, I can't hear you. There you go.
Are you there?
Yes, I can hear you now. Can you see the screen? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is a pilot project partnership with Saanich. The Saanich has started asking questions about from the end of 2019. And now we're moving into 2020. They're looking for a little bit of support. Generally, what Saanich has asked for is support to go forward and work with the province on a pilot project initiative to reduce the speed in streets without a center line to 40 kilometers an hour. That's the meat of what Saanich is looking to create within their municipal boundaries. For Colwood itself, the majority of our local streets are without a center line, and so they would apply if we agree to this. What I've got in front of you on the screen here is just to speak a little bit about the benefits of reduced speeds. I did some web research in preparing for this report to actually see if I could find a graph. And this is as best as that I could come up with, and this is from the BC Active Transportation Guide that was published in the end of 2019 by the Ministry of Transportation and Highways. And what it basically speaks to is that as you increase speeds, the degree of safety for a cyclist in order to have an active cycling community should change. So the faster the speed, the more protected your bike system is. And if we think about our own streets or our own transportation master plan, our local streets can be designed with sharrows and go up to minor bike lanes. Our collectors start to move into that definitive bike lane with a buffer, and some of our arterials are looking to suggest, as we heard Mr. Casey speak in the first part of our presentation today with BC Transit, about buffered or non-buffered. So the first one speaks, the first image in front of you speaks to motor vehicle speed as it directly relates to volume and how you should look at bicycle protection. And the second one reinforces that as well by talking about volumes and speed. So if we look at the lower table, what it says is that if you reduce the speeds to 40 kilometers an hour, you can deal more with greater variety of bike options. So it says depends on context, but you'll note that as we get closer to 50 or higher speeds, that we're definitely going to buffered bike lanes and even protective facilities and multi-use pathways. So there is some background in terms of the initiative on reduced speeds, improving cycling safety. As I've implied, this would appeal to the majority of our local streets, especially those streets that don't have a center line. So moving on, there is a recommendation that I've sought for, and it is so the council or committee can direct staff to attend these pilot project meetings to see if we have an interest in carrying forward. So the recommendation is that committee receive the report outlining the Saanich Speed Reduction Pilot Project Initiative, and that staff be directed to attend those meetings and report back to committee and council the progress and any cost implications. And for those cost implications, in the report that I provided for you, you'll note that I've also spoken to just signing a street as 40 kilometers an hour doesn't necessarily mean that users of that street are going to start traveling 40 kilometers an hour. So we may want to be thinking about local improvement projects to start reducing speeds. So that's the first recommendation. The second being is that Colwood is supportive of the intent, but require further information prior to signing on to the pilot project initiative. Or lastly, that staff do not attend meetings regarding the speed reduction initiative to reduce the speed from 50 to 40 on any local roads without a center line. So there is history with Colwood where we have reduced the speeds on roads. To reduce speeds below 50 kilometers an hour, which is a Motor Vehicle Act consideration, the city must pass a bylaw. And so there are 6 speed reduction zones of 30 kilometers an hour due to schools. There's 1 speed reduction zone in place for 20 kilometers an hour on Arkland Avenue. There is 14 speed reductions right now associated with playgrounds at 30 kilometers an hour routes. And there are 10 other areas of town that are speed reduced to 30 kilometers an hour at all time, being Belmont, for example, and Carindale and Haida, to list a few. And there are 3 roads that are already signed at 40 kilometers an hour that have all been considered by bylaw. So I'm here to answer any questions that committee might have. Thank you very much.
Councillor Parkinson, you're up, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So as I understand this, Saanich is going to do a pilot project on streets that don't have a center line and reducing the speed limit to 40 from 50 and see if that's a good idea or not. And I think, Brent, you outlined a whole bunch of places where we've looked within Colwood and made a decision on speed limits with or without center lines being marked. I mean, we did it last week, I think, at Royal Bay. I'm not sure I see any benefit to participating in this. I would say encourage Saanich to go ahead and have a look, and when they're done, they'll sort of announce what they found, and the province will announce what they found, and it may be applicable to Colwood and it may not be. But really, it sounds to me like it's just sending staff across town to a bunch of meetings to, you know, to input. Why don't we just let Saanich do their thing and wish them luck and move on? So that's my thoughts.
Are you making that motion then, perhaps? While I have you on the line here, that's option.
Well, if I'm on the line, I would move that staff not attend meetings regarding the speed reduction initiative to reduce the speed limit from 50 kilometers to 40 kilometers per hour on any local road without a center line.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Parkinson. And Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm fine with what Councillor Parkinson recommended. I was about to say the same thing. I guess the one question I do have for staff as well is, have we engaged the RCMP? This would seem like this would be a conversation that we would want to have them involved with, and if they actually see a need for it.
Thank you very much, Mayor Martin. Through the chair, no, we have not engaged the RCMP. The report talks about potential enforcement issues and the expectation of the public with seeing a speed zone. And before we started investing time with the RCMP or other people, we wanted to see if committee or council favored the motion. So no, we have not.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Logan.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion. I really don't see this as a priority for staff. And when we mess around with speed limits and lower speed limits, we have to realize that it has an effect on our volunteer fire department as well, with reduced response times. And I know that's not an issue for Victoria and Saanich that have career fire departments, but it is certainly an issue for us. As Brent had suggested, there is an expectation of an increased enforcement when we lower these speed limits. And not to say there isn't issues in certain areas, and we could probably come up with some engineered solutions for those particular issues, but I've driven the 40K zones in the city of Victoria, and frankly, I found them more frustrating than anything. And I recognize that the transit has had to do with them as well in terms of service times. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Logan. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I do support the motion that's been proposed, and this has been the subject of several debates at UBCM and AVICC, where both Victoria and Saanich were seeking to push the province on the issue to relieve them of the cost implications of posting the signage. But even more than just the cost of the signage, for me, is as the report said, signage alone may not affect the speeds, and that certainly has been our experience here in Colwood, where we have reduced the speeds. There have been calls for, increased presence of the RCMP. And the other aspect, which I do really appreciate being pointed out in the report, is that it definitely necessitates some alternative engineering and actual hardscaping of the area to try to reduce vehicle speeds on a road that's been designed and built for a higher speed than what we're posting it at. And so I think Colwood has done some very good things in trying to address the issue by trying to increase the walkability score around each and every elementary school that we have. That's been some really important work to do. And the financial considerations for just jumping in to doing the whole city, I think could be very large. And I'm certainly aware of areas in Saanich where, Saanich is a very large municipality, and they have areas that were developed with pedestrian and cyclist infrastructure, and they have areas that completely have been not looked at whatsoever. And they're making some improvements now that have really big cost implications for Saanich. So I think the targeted approach that Colwood has taken of trying to increase active transportation and specifically targeting youth and school zones is very defensible. And I'm sure we have lots more work to do, but I don't think this pilot project would really benefit Colwood in the in either the short or the long term. We need to tackle our problems possibly a little bit differently. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing nobody else, I'd like to call the motion. All those opposed? Seeing nothing, the motion passes. And item number 6, the next meeting I see is September 28th, 2020. Move for adjournment. Anybody? Thanks, Mayor Martin, and that's a wrap. Thank you very much, everybody.